If you turn around and you peer back into the history of individual humans, the landscape blossoms with generous acts of the human spirit. Individual selflessness, profound acts of generosity. Almost every day, there are countless acts of human kindness that make our spirits soar. There are selfless acts of courage. There are countless acts of kindness on the street, in the office, anywhere you look. There are people feeding those with not enough to eat. There are doctors giving freely of their expertise to heal the sick. Kindness and generosity of spirits abound. Yet, we must confess on this day of confessions that we humans too often fall short of the behavior. Now, if you turn around and you peer back into human history writ large, through the lens of ethics and values, you see a rather bleak landscape. Most of human history, seen through this lens, is an ethical desert. There are a few scattered about, but by and large, the picture is bleak. On the level of groups, of people, of countries, I'm sorry to say, on the level of religion, of corporations, of institutions, human history has been characterized by self-interest, greed, power, prejudice, a laundry list of human weakness. You see aggressive nation states waging war. You see prejudices and intolerance used as the basis to consolidate power. You see an utter disregard for the individual. There are, to be sure, exceptions to this. There are great acts of courage and humanitarianism by countries and corporations, but by and large, the collective human experience is largely one of war, prejudice, corruption, greed, and avarice. So why is this the beginning of a High Holy Day sermon, and what possible connection does it have to do to the Holy Days or to Judaism? Quite a lot, it turns out. You see, Judaism has a lot to say about human behavior in all forms. Judaism is concerned with the behavior of individual humans, and Judaism is concerned with the behavior of humans organized in groups, institutions, governments. Let me be clearer. Judaism is entirely about human behavior. The entire point of Judaism is to set the standard for the highest ideals of human behavior. Judaism is aspirational. There is an ideal way to behave, and the world would be better off if everybody behaved that way. Aspirational values of Judaism is what drew me to Judaism, what made me love Judaism, what made me want to be a rabbi. And these are the aspirational values of which I spoke in my sermon last night. This is what I'm talking about. Everything in Judaism, every single thing, is designed to lead us toward ethics. Wearing a talit, lighting Shabbat candles, every single jot and tittle of the Torah and the Talmud, all of it is designed to lead us to ethical behavior. Prayer and ritual practice have no meaning outside of leading us to ethical behavior. And this is especially in progressive Judaism, given our posture toward ritual. Just for the record, I am not saying that ritual behavior, which is something like saying the blessing over the wine, for example, isn't important. I'm saying that the purpose of ritual is to lead us to ethical behavior. Most people need some help or some guidance. They need a structure. They need to be taught how to behave ethically. And in Judaism, that guidance takes the form of ritual. And these rituals are meaningful, and they're inspirational, and they're life-affirming, and they're sustaining, and they're nourishing. Yet our spirits cannot truly be sated without adherence that should flow from these rituals. But it's not merely individual behavior that counts. It's the behavior of the community that counts as well. Judaism makes no distinction between individuals and the community when it comes to ethics. Judaism assumes both spheres are guided by ethics. And in fact, Judaism teaches us that community ritual is important and leads to better communal behavior. And this is one of the reasons we have a minyan to pray. This is one of the reasons we require witnesses for life cycles. And this is one of the reasons that the liturgy we read today in shul is in the form of the first person. This is the reason we are taught that our community will be judged harshly if even one member is found wanting. Last night, I set out the argument that our world, in particular here in the United States and in Israel, has become untethered from ethics as a result of the rise of nationalism. I suggested that its very nature involves trampling on the rights of others to the advantage of the nation. A nationalist movement can only thrive in the willingness of the populace to tacitly ignore or willfully reject the ideas and value propositions upon which a state rests. Individuals believe that if their individual ethical behavior is above reproach, the ethical lapses of the state do not redound to them. But this is not how Judaism views the matter. Judaism makes no such distinction. A turn toward the ethical by the community is the only, and by the individual is the only nationalism. A turn toward the ethical is the only antidote to the chaos of our times. A turn toward the ethical is the best hope for us as individuals, for the United States and Israel as countries, and in reality for the world. And for us as Jews, ethical behavior is a commandment and an obligation. It is not, and in my view, ethical behavior is the sine qua non of being Jewish. Now that's all fine and good. But what does it mean? What does it really mean? It means that we must embrace the idea that all of Judaism leads us toward ethical behavior by actually practicing Jewish ethics in every part of our lives. It's shockingly difficult. That's the reason so many Jews tend to focus on ritual rather than ethics. Ritual is easier to embrace. You're supposed to light the candles at the beginning of a festival, so you do. That's easy. You're supposed to motzi, so you do. Here's an important point. If I, your rabbi, tells you that Judaism requires you to light the candles, to recite Kiddush and motzi, you won't say to me, well, Rabbi, that's your opinion. I think everyone here would agree that Judaism does in fact command us to do those things. You may not do them, I may not do them, but you won't argue that Jewish teaching requires us to do those rituals. When the rabbi speaks about ritual, many people, perhaps most people, are willing to give the benefit of the doubt. Of course, he went to school, he knows this stuff. But it's different when it comes to ethics. Too many people listen to me preach about the ethics of Judaism, and they respond with this. Well, that's your opinion. Well, the first thing is that it's not my opinion. It is my interpretation based on a lifetime of study. And the second thing I would say is that, yes, it is certainly my interpretation, but Judaism is able to bear the weight of multiple interpretations, even opposing interpretations. And indeed, over the course of Jewish history, it has. From the debate about whether it is permissible to eat rice on Passover to the debate about whether a mezuzah should be vertical or horizontal, Judaism lives comfortably with widely divergent interpretations of what is right and what is wrong. Okay, so maybe you're this. Well, this is Rabbi Aaronson's interpretation. And I like him, but he's still wrong. Or maybe many of you are thinking, well, I don't like him, and he's still wrong. That's fine. But Judaism, this is the important part. Judaism, one didn't merely reject another interpretation. He had an alternate interpretation. So my interpretation is that Judaism is entirely about ethical human behavior, and that everything else in Judaism leads to that. Maybe you have a different interpretation, but don't merely disagree or reject. Offer another interpretation. In fact, I'll offer another interpretation. There's a well-grounded argument in Judaism that suggests ritual behavior, not ethical behavior, is the sine qua non of Judaism. That idea, it's completely wrong, but I respect it and recognize its legitimacy. I would add that in a progressive congregation, where we have a much different relationship with ritual than some of our co-religionists, that position is a much weaker position. I want us as a congregation to embrace the idea that Judaism is entirely about ethical behavior. Again, this is not to say that Judaism is not about ritual. Ritual is vitally important. Worship, which I think we here at Judea do particularly well, is important. Life cycles, these are profound Jewish touchstones. I am not suggesting they aren't important or we should give them up. To say that Judaism is entirely about ethical behavior is not at all to exclude other parts of Judaism. It is, however, to say that everything in Judaism leads us to ethical behavior, and we must make this the core of who we are. I'm by no means the first rabbi of this congregation to say this. I've previously talked about the ark behind me with its unusual text, which speaks entirely of ethics. And many of you are here frequently enough that you spend a good deal of time looking at it's entirely possible, through no fault of your own, that you're not quite sure what it says. Over the next 5 years, we are going to work toward making those ideas palpable and real in the life of this community. I spoke about this a few years ago, about how most arks have the 10 Commandments, but ours has ethical precepts like honor your father and mother, and bringing about peace, and comforting the bereaved. I failed when I first spoke about this to do well by you. I plan to change. These ideas on the ark are the value propositions Judaism esteems. These ideas are not meant to be out to make a political point. They're meant to be studied and discussed and studied again and ultimately embraced. One of these ideas, just to take one, as you're looking at it, it's on your left side. It's the fourth one down, Hava'at Shalom, to bring about peace. Surely you must important the idea of peace is in Judaism. Almost every service we sing Oseh Shalom. Maybe if you know any Hebrew at all, the one word you know is Shalom. We think commonly of peace as the opposite of war, but in Judaism it's much more. Shalom Bayit household, between spouses, between parents and children. Peace is the concluding word of the priestly benediction, Yevarecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. Shalom is the word we use to inquire about your physical health. Importantly for our times, peace also means civility. Yes, civility is actual Jewish value. It's no different than lighting the Shabbat candles or wearing a talit. Civility in the face of incivility. Civility even when your most strident adversary is getting on your very last nerve. According to Judaism, there is never an excuse for incivility, no matter the circumstance. So angered by current events that you've lost your ability to be civil? If so, you are violating the sacred teachings of Jewish law. It doesn't matter whether you're on the right or the left or anywhere in between. You're violating Jewish law. Are you so angered by another opinion that you cannot bear to be in the same room to disagree? Seen in another light, are you so committed to your views that you must share them with anyone and everyone, even when you're asked to stop, and even when the situation is inappropriate? All of this is a violation of Jewish teaching about civility and peace. All of these behaviors cause strife. Behaviors violate Jewish teaching. Yet as much as the commandment to bring about peace has to do with nations and incivility and other kinds of things, it has to do with inner peace. There's so many here in this community who cannot find their way toward inner peace. And in this instance, I'm not speaking about mental health. I'm speaking of struggling to make ends meet or faced with challenging relationships. But the important thing is this: bringing about peace and honoring your mother and father and the other things that are written right there in front of you every time you're here in this sanctuary. They're not merely nice ideas. They're not merely sayings on Hallmark cards. It's a requirement to understand what this means and commit their lives to it. It is no less important and vital to being Jewish than reciting the Kiddush, observing the Sabbath, being called to the Torah as a bat mitzvah, or being part of a minyan. When you live a life that strives to bring about peace, for example, you're fulfilling being Jewish, and when you don't, you're falling short of the ideas of Judaism. We may debate the meanings of the ethical precept of peace. For instance, what does it mean to bring about peace when an army attacks you? But I don't believe we can debate that bringing about peace is an important Jewish value. And the same is true with every time we look at them. Over the next 5 years, our community will embark on a project to teach, to learn, and to live these values. Again, I spoke of this once before, and I did not do right by you, and now we shall do better. From our community's mental health initiative to our social justice and social action projects in our schools, we will teach the basic idea that everything in Judaism leads toward ethical human behavior. And my goal is that in 5 years, when people ask you, why do you belong to Temple Judea? You will say that you are proud to be part of a community that puts ethical behavior at the core. We as a clergy team are taking some small steps, and we will continue to work toward this. There are many reasons I know why you may first join Temple Judea. Our ECC, having a bat mitzvah, a wedding, a social connection. But once in our orbit, I want you to say that you remember it because it represents something true and enduring in a world where too few things are. I want you to say that you are proud of Temple Judea because we are a place that puts Jewish values at the center. I want you to say that you find our ritual meaningful because it leads you to be the best person you can be. I want you to say Temple Judea represents, in some small way, the world as you believe it ought to be. Amen. Shana Tova.